G'day whisky lovers, this is some Whisky Bloke and welcome to Malts with Mates, where we talk to brand ambassadors and distillers from all around the world about all things whisky.
Today for Malts with Mates, we're joined by Chris Hayes from Teeling. Chris, how you doing, mate?
Good. How's yourself, man?
Yeah, pretty good. I'm enjoying this wonderful, clear skies that Dublin's having, despite the fact we thought we were going to have awful weather.
Same, I know. Do you know something? I can't believe it that every day I think that I've talked to you, it seems to be a sunny day. So you're obviously a good charm that I need to keep you around and keep the sun going.
Well, the sun follows Australians. I hear that's a thing. So it kind of just
the
goes.
burn follows the Irish.
I'll tell you what, I think it's been about a year since I actually got some good sun, so I've been out the back most days, doing my work out there, and I still look pale as all get out, but at least we're having a bit of fun.
Exactly, yeah, nice.
Anyway, so what I want to ask you today was just a few questions. So could you walk us a little bit through Teelings and yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So I suppose anybody who's unfamiliar with the brand, first and foremost, we're a Dublin-based distillery. In terms of our history, we were the first new distillery in Dublin in 125 years. As you can obviously hear from my thick Dublin accent, I'm born and bred. I live about 30 minutes from our distillery. So that was kind of the first thing that attracted me to the brand, very much kind of 2015, 2014. Funnily enough, actually, how I kind of got into it was I had a bottle of Teeling small batch. So, of course, a bottle of our flagship whiskey, which I had at home in 2015, and I didn't buy it. And I asked my dad, who were Teeling? I've never heard of this brand before. And of course, he was convinced that I had gone out and bought this whiskey called Teeling that nobody had heard of in 2015. So I kind of did a little bit of research on them and, discovered all of the innovation that they were doing in terms of cask types, in terms of all the styles of whiskey and the ingredients, and that kind of really attracted me to the brand. So I approached the Teelings and very much kind of expressed my interest to work for them abroad. I actually my mum's a French speaker, so kind of makes it a little bit easier when you can talk about whiskey in a couple of different languages. But that very much opened doors for me, and from there, I've been working now with the brand as their European brand ambassador for the last 2 years.
Nice.
So yeah, we're a Dublin-based distillery. We're family-owned. Owned by two brothers, Jack and Stephen Teeling. Obviously, one of the great perks of working for an independent distillery means there's a ton of room to constantly experiment, which is always fun. And our distillery, for anybody who's not familiar with it, we're based in an area called the Liberties, called Newmarket Square. So it kind of has this deep history, which you know much about. Originally dates back as far as the dawn of time, nearly, with Irish whiskey, but would have housed 32 fully functional distilleries in the 19th century. So we kind of lean in a little bit to that history, but as you know, Marcus, we're less of a historical brand and more focused on kind of the stuff behind me, and that's sort of all embodied through our logo. Like the phoenix is very much a symbol of kind of the new and rebirth and renaissance and all that. So kind of flying the flag for the new generation, shall we say.
No, it's fantastic. And obviously you're the regional European ambassador, but obviously with these times we can't be traveling. I think the last time I saw you was in, I want to say Belgium. Was that?
For the Ghent Whisky Festival. Geez, that was some show. That was incredible. So it's been very unusual times, I think, for both of us. Obviously, a lot of my work will be doing the likes of whiskey shows and master classes and workshops and stuff constantly abroad. So I think when this whole situation came down, it was very much kind of working on your feet and restructuring your job. But I think we've kind of found it very quickly, and I kind of found a certain sense of normality, which is good. And we've been doing a lot of kind of online workshops and kind of working remotely, obviously practicing social distancing and all that. So it's been a challenge, but we very much found our groove now that we're a couple of weeks into it.
Oh, that's fantastic. Going back to the range as well, obviously you've got your small batch, you've got your single grain and your single malt, and you've also released the single pot still recently. For those who are unaware of what single pot still is, could you walk us through the history and the production?
Absolutely, yeah. So I suppose in a nutshell, it has a lot of structural similarities with a single malt. So for anybody, for example, who knows our classic single malt, it's matured in 5 different wine casks. But the base is malted barley, 100% malted barley. So that's structural similarity. What I mean by that is that with a single pot still, it does have a small percentage of malted barley. Now the history kind of comes in way back when the kind of Irish-Anglo relations weren't the best. And of course, they started to put tax on malted barley. So the Irish, as you would, in order to avoid tax, we stopped using malted barley. And particularly in Dublin, we kind of revered this new style of unmalted barley, so raw, ungerminated, natural barley straight from the ground. And some malted barley. So a combination of the two. Later on, then you start to see legislation, or you see kind of a more of a structure behind this category known as pot still, which nowadays is 30% malt, 30% unmalted barley, and then kind of 5% of other ingredients. But it very much kind of started off in history as a sort of a hodgepodge of different cereals like rye or wheat or oats, and was kind of in defiance of taxes. So it's interesting how a lot of those categories and a lot of those styles have kind of come out of necessity, and then we're kind of led through innovation or through creativity. So with this one here, our single pot still, that was actually our first release. Obviously, if you do the maths, Teeling only set up as a brand 2012, or distillery finished 2015. We've whiskey that's as old as 24 years old, 30 years old. So we're not lying to you. We started off with an old family reserve from the 1980s as kind of our starting off points. It was John Teeling, who in many respects, I kind of see him as someone who revolutionized the Irish whiskey industry. Because if you look back at the 80s, like there was nothing in terms of production. You've got Middleton, Bushmills, and of course, that was pretty Powers in Dublin in the 70s. So you got 3 fully functional distilleries. John, of course, comes along in the 80s with Ireland's only sort of independent distillery at the time, and kind of goes in a new direction, which was been done before by all means. He wasn't reinventing the wheel, but bringing back things like obviously peated whiskey. Connemara, the only peated, or one of the only peated Irish single malts on the market at the moment, is kind of attributed to the Cooley distillery or to John during the 80s. Likewise, Tyrconnell, incredibly forward thinking, 43%, matured in the likes of Madeira casks and sherry casks and port casks. Again, these are things that have been done before, but really kind of gathering interest in Irish whiskey again. So that obviously did incredibly well. It's where Jack and Stephen, our managers, started kind of learning the ropes from their father. And it's a nice family tie as well, from father to son. Or father to sons, I should say. But after that, then Jim Beam essentially bought out the distillery. So they were having a merger with Suntory, and they eventually bought distilleries in both Ireland and Scotland. So our whiskey from the past, we invested in 16,000 barrels that came from Cooley. That was kind of part of the clause of the contract of selling off the distillery. So very cleverly, they sold the site, but they didn't sell the juice, which I think is incredible. Very, very intelligent business venture. To buy Cooley in the first place was very, very intelligent. Obviously, on the border of Northern Ireland and Ireland during the 80s, if you can remember, must have been, nearly next to nothing. So it was all very, very well thought out. And then our first whiskey, so the Old Family Reserve has brought some of the great whiskeys that people know, like the Teeling's 24-year-old, obviously picked up World's Best Single Malt last year, World Whisky Awards, like the 30-year-old, like the 33. So you've got a vast, I suppose, range of whiskies from the old and the young, and this is kind of where that breaks, being our first whiskey, if you like, from our distillery, from our stills. And in terms of how we operated that stock, our master distiller, AlexASCO, is very much hand selecting any of that old reserve. So it's not just like, he took that whiskey, put it in a bottle and sold it. As you well know, there's a lot more in the blending process and even in the bottling, whether you are dropping the ABV or whether you're keeping it a cask strength or what you're doing with that. That's really kind of his first challenge when we set up in 2015. So the pot still is matured in ex-sherry butts. So it's Oloroso sherry, some virgin American oak, and you've got some American bourbon barrels. And it's 50% malt, 50% unmalted barley. So quite in keeping with that really traditional style. And yes, we've tried to kind of put our own stamp on it in many respects. So we actually did 3 different batches of this. I'm sure you might have tried some of the previous ones. What's interesting to see, whether you like them or whether you hate them, is the evolution of the liquids. You can't argue, you know, from batch 1 to batch 3, they're night and day. And the reason we wanted to release batches was not from a commercial point of view, or not from a kind of marketing led point of view. It was more, we genuinely wanted to have a conversation with pot still enthusiasts like yourself, and figure out what is the best cask types, what is the best mash bill that work with this recipe that hasn't been done in nearly 50 years. You know, we were very much not trying to copy or create a carbon copy of some of those marketing leading pot stills that are already out there that, you know, myself and yourself have grown up on and absolutely adore. There's no need for that. So we very much wanted to try and go in a new angle, which I think a lot of distilleries are doing as well, which is cool.
No, it's a very interesting idea, and I completely agree with that. Are you continuing to release different batches of the single pot still as you move forward, or are you happy with the style, the taste of the current single pot still, and that's how you're keeping it?
It's a good question, actually. Yeah. So, well, I suppose obviously when the liquid starts to get a little bit older, like at the moment, it's hitting around 4 years old. So obviously, you know, it's definitely something that we'd be interested in doing, like an 8 statement, something at a 16, at a 21. You know, I personally think that would be pretty amazing. In 10 years' time, what I really look forward to is when we're old and disheveled and grey, that, you know, we can look back on the first release and do a comparative. That was another reason why we decided to kind of do these batches, so that you could look at a legacy point of view. And for any big Teeling fans, make that comparison from batch 1, batch 2, batch 3, as well as the original charity bottling. So I suppose to answer your question, I personally would hope that we do create further batches, for want of a better word, in the future. There's nothing that's been confirmed at the moment. Obviously, we need a little bit more time. And I think that this is also going to become a certain foundation for some of our single casks as well. So in our distillery, we've done some distillery exclusives. The base of that was some of the components of the single pot still, kind of to highlight their influence. So we'd one which was matured in the Virgin American oak, which was quite interesting. Bottled at around 59% ABV, drinks like it's about 40. It's delicious, far too easy to drink.
Well, I mean, your total capacity is quite large, but as you've spoken about, you're really well known for your different cask expressions. You know, your single malt being comprised of so many different styles. How many different types of casks does Teeling have laid down at the moment? Can you give us any hints to what we'd see in the future, or what you might bring out from the distillery?
Absolutely, yeah. I think ballpark number, I mean, this is changing on a daily basis. We're looking at roughly, I'd say, around 20,000 casks up in our warehouse. So obviously, we originally started off with 16,000. We invested in many more. On top of that, then, we've actually laid an additional 10,000 casks distilled and filled into casks from Dublin. So that's a big landmark for ourselves. You know, being the first distillery in Dublin, there's now 4 in Dublin in total, having the first whiskey in nearly 50 years. It's great to start to see that production kicking up a little bit more. And I suppose in terms then of cask varieties, you're absolutely right, Marcus. We've pretty much anything from, you know, ex-tequila barrels, ex-beer barrels, ex-wine barrels, ex-Armagnac, ex-vermouth, kind of anything you can think of under the sun. Like a lot of distilleries, we've been looking also as well at wood variants. So experimenting with different types. As anybody who's watching that doesn't know, in the Irish whiskey legislation, of course, it's pretty much the vaguest thing possible. We can use anything from you know, your mother's cupboard to a barrel of fish and call it whiskey, which is fantastic for new distilleries. So like you can use anything from acacia, cherry woods, hickory, pine, amberana, and that's also something we've kind of been tapping into. One thing I've enjoyed in particular is we've done some cask exchanges. So again, we started this back in 2015, 2016. This was before a lot of the rises of some of those great whiskies like the Caskmates, or even outside Irish whiskey like the Glenfiddich IPA experiment. So one of the first we did was with an Irish brewery, Galway Bay. I'm sure you know their stuff. We sent them some whiskey barrels basically on the sly, and said, look, if the beer you make is good, we want to hear back from you. If not, we never sent you anything. And turns out the beer was absolutely phenomenal. 200 fathoms, like gold dust now at the moment if you try and find a bottle of it, but it was a 9.6% imperial stout. Again, you drink them easily, and of course you'd be on the floor after 2 or 3, but these were matured in our rum casks from our small batch, from our flagship whiskey. And then they sent us back those beer barrels. So sometimes we go directly to producers. We've used the likes of Agricole Rum from Martinique. We've used some Riesling barrels from Alsace-Lorraine, kind of Germany region. And most recently, we've used some gin casks. So they're ones that I'm really kind of excited for that are actually already on the market at the moment. Like some of those, they'd be our small batch collaborations. So they'd be available in some select European markets. One in particular that I'm particularly excited about that will be coming from Dublin very soon as well. Speaking of peated whiskey, is we will be, fingers crossed, with all of the madness going on at the moment, we'll be able to release our first peated single malt from our distillery. So that's something that I'm incredibly excited for. You know, I'm a lover of both non-peated and peated whiskey. So far, we've been looking at bourbon and Sauternes as the 2 cask types. So obviously Sauternes regional dessert wine coming from France. Tends to work really well with peat, and the ppm is quite low. So we've had obviously great success with the 24 with this combination, and we wanted to kind of tap into it a little bit further. But that's something that people can definitely look forward to, hopefully in the near future.
No, that's fantastic. I'm a massive peat fan myself, as is Mick apparently of Still Surreal, who's just he's just put up a comment saying yes, Pete. Yeah. So cheers, nice. Mick. We do love peat as well. I guess with that, are you getting that peat and that peated barley from Ireland itself? As far as I understood, a few years ago, no one in Ireland really had the capacity to be doing any peated barley, or has that changed?
So I think that has changed a little bit. I mean, there's a lot of distilleries that are going about this in different ways. You've the like of, I think they're pronounced Curragh or Curragh, who are now looking at seaweeds in the peating process, which I think is quite interesting. Kind of similar to how like Macmira are looking with their Svensrok and looking at alternative ways of smoking their whiskies. You then have the likes of like the Glengarriff from West Cork, who are using obviously like their peated barrows as opposed to the actual peated malt. For ourselves now, I actually couldn't tell you exactly what we're using, whether it's say Scottish peat or whether it's Irish peat. This is literally hasn't even been put into bottles yet, so my knowledge of it is very, very limited as it stands. But I know for any of our alternative ingredients, so like any of our specialty malts, be that chocolate malt, be it crystal malt or porter malt or whatever, we're sourcing a lot of those from a company called Simpsons in the UK. Any of our kind of distillers malt then would come from MCI, coming from Cork and Middleton. So that's where we're getting that from.
That's great. Simon, the whiskey novice here, has asked a question. He wants to know, how will the gin cask affect the flavour?
So at first, absolutely terribly is the answer. When we first put that into casks, it was just like an explosion of juniper and car seed, and it was just way too heavy. I remember trying it first in casks up in Greenore. So our warehouse is, just to give you a perspective, is about 50 kilometers from our distillery. But then we let that sit a little bit longer, and it just shows that it's not a mathematical approach to making whiskey. Sometimes there's these factors like the climate, like the wood, like the anything that really come into play. And 6 months later, it was so well structured, so well balanced. You still had those hints of juniper now with the rye based gin. So it's coming from Kiro. I don't know if you know them, based in Finland.
In Finland. Yes.
Yeah, so they are doing some absolutely stunning gins. Really, I think going outside of the realms of, again, how people perceive gin as a category. So they've done like a barrel-aged rye gin and sent us back those barrels. And as a result, so it was bourbon cask, as far as I know, that they used. You have a little bit of that inherent sweetness and that kind of sweet coconut, ginger, leathers and tobacco on top of our pre-existing blend, which is super interesting. But the gin effect, was really something that kind of took a little bit of trial and error, and the finished product was phenomenal. They've also done as I said, so we did a cask exchange, released the two products at the same time. They've a finished gin matured in our whiskey barrels, which I think is very cool.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I mean, Simon's also, he's really keen on this one because he wants to know, how do we try it? When is it available? I think
So
he
this is
might have to
actually
take a trip out to Ireland, but
yeah, this is actually available at the moment. Now, unfortunately, like a lot of these small batch collaborations, we're only talking between 2 to 3 casks at a time. So with this one in particular, there was only 1,500 bottles in production. This will be mostly obviously available in Scandinavia, in Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Finland. You can find it in other select markets like Belgium, for example. So what I would say to you, get on to your international friends, see if they can send you over a bottle, is your best bet. If not, next time that this is all up and running, please God, I'll be able to present it to you in person at some stage.
no, definitely. And I did note earlier, you poured yourself a little dram just before. What are you drinking today?
Yes, you noticed that. So this actually was something I had. Yeah, this was some of our Teeling's Brabazon.
Yes.
This is a single malt matured in 6 different port pipes. It's kind of my go-to dram if I'm looking for a decent single malt that I don't feel too guilty about pouring, a 200, 300 euro bottle of whiskey. It's obviously a non-age statement, so it's between 11 and 17 years old. But 3 different styles, absolutely delicious, honestly. Tawny port, ruby port, and white port. So it kind of has that inherent tannic quality to it, really dry finish, and drinks like a typical Irish single malt. Very fruit forward, very light, very accessible. Also bottled at 49.5% ABV. So it's definitely not for the faint-hearted.
Oh, fantastic. Of course, completely forgot to ask this earlier, but returning to the peated whiskey, what could you tell us about the lack of peated whiskey in Ireland and where that comes from?
Well, I think first and foremost, it kind of became associated with how whiskey was legalized, how it was taxed. You kind of have this breakdown around the 18th century between Parliament whiskey and poaching. Essentially, now a lot of poaching at the time would have been using peat because obviously it's cheaper. Would have been using it from the likes of the bogs, and most people would have been making it in their home in like shebeens and home bars, or up in the mountains making what's called mountain tea. And then Parliament whiskey, which was legal, which was heavily taxed, obviously was trying to avoid peat to a certain extent, and kind of became synonymous a lot with Dublin distillers in particular. But I think the peat, first and foremost, comes down to, if you look at the general history of Irish whiskey, it does kind of go back and forth. By the 80s, so nearly 100 years later, obviously Irish whiskey was on its knees, only represented 2% of global whiskey sales. During the 18th, 19th century, we were nearly one of the most sold spirits in the world. So that comparative is incredible. But at the end of the 80s, at the kind of end or the start of the 80s, you have a lot of distilleries that were existing at the time who were very much looking more at triple distillation and looking at more of an accessible, light, easygoing, fruity, fresh Irish whiskey, which absolutely great adjectives to attach to an Irish whiskey. But I think from that, you kind of had carbon copies. You kind of had people who saw the success of these fantastic whiskies and started a trend of non-peated Irish whiskey. And as a result, even to this day, yourself, Marcus, when you go over to other countries around the world, people mention, Irish whiskey, triple distilled, not peated, soft, light, and that's absolutely true. But I think we're in no shape or form, limited. We're under no obligation to just triple distill. So like the 24-year-old from Teeling, for example, you're looking at double distillation as opposed to triple distillation. You're also looking at slightly peated. It's 10% peat, and we'll be releasing now our own from our distillery as well. So it's something I think that's starting to come back, but I think it was just kind of a counter argument to how well Scotch whiskey was doing, and particularly peated Scotches during the 80s. Was my take on it anyway.
No, it's a great take, and it's always amazing to hear everyone's take on that, because it's a really interesting thing. I've just seen Isnay Winston is replying to Simon, and he said that he's found some online. I believe that's your gin cask. It's funny you actually mentioned Cairo, because I've got Mika coming on here in about 2 weeks' time or something.
Oh, nice. Yeah, tell him I said
so
hi.
I'll be sure
Lovely gent.
Hi. Now, a question that I had from AlexASCO before we even started filming. He
You were going to say
know
live. I nearly left. My ghost nearly left the room.
No, I don't know if I just brought him in now. No. He wanted to know which Teeling brother is your favorite. Now, I can edit this part out.
Which Teeling brother? Pass. No, do you know something? Genuinely, no BS involved. They're both so lovely individuals. They're very different in many respects, and they're just so approachable. Is the thing that I've really taken from, and what makes me love my job is they really are just singular individuals in the industry. They're just so approachable. But to choose a favorite, I couldn't do it, Marcus.
Oh, that's a good answer. I should point out as well, by the way, today I'm having a little bit of Teelings as well. I've got the small batch cask in what is got to be one of the nicest marketing gins I've ever seen. I hate to say once I'm finished with it, I might actually turn it into a couple of flower pots because, my backyard needs spicing up, and that looks like it'll go down great, but it is fantastic.
Nice.
Now, I did also mention something that I'm going to want to start doing is asking a couple of quiz questions at the end of this, just to get an idea, how much we know, how incredibly outdated my books are, and what the general knowledge is. So, if you're game for some questions, I've got a couple of different categories to choose from.
Shoot, see how we get on.
All right. Do you want to go for vodka, gin, or whiskey?
Sure, let's go in that order. Vodka, gin, whiskey. I'll take vodka.
Okay. So, vodka question number 1. What does the word vodka mean literally?
Okay, so depending in Russia or in Poland, it means the same thing. It means water. Vodka or wada and wada, depending on how you pronounce it.
No, I think I don't know the pronunciation, but you are right. It means water or little water. Apparently, no doubt a Slavic jest. So that's quite fun. I always love something like that. When and where was vodka first made?
Where was vodka?
You can. When and where? Now, again, this book from the 70s, so it's going to be outdated.
When and where? So I was.
You can give it a history by all means.
I was brushing up on this recently, and I know that there's. Obviously, it's kind of like the Irish-Scotch argument as to who founded the first whiskeys. You've multiple different references, but I want to say something about during the time of the first. I want to ball game and say 18th century. And I'm going to go with Russia.
Okay, what I've got here is.
I feel like that's very
we've got records from Poland in the 8th century.
Okay,
but
so it's
a little more off. You're just 1 millennia off. That's it.
I mean, that makes sense because when you think about it, the forms of distillation came in from the Middle East, and surely, obviously, it would have been 7th century onwards at least.
Well, I do have a clarifier here that says it was likely a distillation of wine, so therefore a brandy. Nowadays, what we know as vodka would probably be 11th or 12th century Poland, but a very long time. And I know Estonia as well has a obscenely long history with vodka. I couldn't tell you when it came about in Russia though, but I'll take your first Tsar. What's a few thousand between friends? Yeah, Mick, it's all a good laugh.
And I suppose it's really interesting vodka. You kind of have now at the moment a ton of new brands who are looking at more characterful vodka. Like there's we were talking about peat. There's someone now who's looking at some peated. I think is it Kalak or Kalak? I can't think of how you pronounce her name.
Kalak peated
vodka, which I tried that recently, and is amazing. Not to go on a tangent, but
no. I think those are the same guys who did. I feel like they also did a gin. Was that not Origin Spirits who released Kalak vodka?
Yes, same crowd who were doing a couple of different products.
Fantastic stuff all around. Absolutely. Now, I've got some things here. Most people know the delicious Bloody Mary, but can you describe what you would put into a bull shot, a hot shot, or a blood shot. You can choose any of those.
I'm going to take a blood shot because I'm guessing that it is either blood orange juice or it's some human blood. Probably one of the two. Oh God, I literally was doing a video earlier on the history of cocktails. A blood shot. I couldn't tell you. No, I'm gonna go with some form of spirit, blood orange juice, and more secondary ingredients.
So apparently, it's featuring tomato juice half and half with consommé. So it is similar to a bull shot in that it contains vodka, beef consommé, lemon juice, but it's eschewing that kind of lemon juice and going for the tomato juice. Now I only had bull shot for the first time New Year's gone, and I tell you what, you get a mug of it and it's absolutely fantastic, but then you drink the mug and you don't realize you just drunk what is mainly vodka. 3 mugs in, you're on the couch.
Yeah. So the issue with vodka-based cocktails is you're not tasting, the spirit as much.
Which is disappointing, but I guess, with people looking to do more and more interesting things with vodkas, as you were talking about, it does give us a chance to kind of be bringing out those new vodkas and bringing out more forward flavor vodka cocktails, which is fantastic.
Yeah, I suppose with vodka traditionally, it's more looking at it as a canvas to take on other flavors, which is it's what it was revered for. Like a lot of people look at filtration, for example, as a negative topic for vodka, but it's very much revered by purists who are looking at creating a very clean style spirit, be that like paper micron filters, be it coconut carbon filters, be it sandstone, lava stone, whatever. And obviously that's built up a little bit through marketing, but yeah, it should be interesting to see how that changes up the global if it changes up the global cocktail industry, because I know a lot of things that's current at the moment is more obviously flavors vodkas.
Yeah, I'm not really big on the flavored vodkas. I'm not big on vodka, hands down. I mean, it's not whiskey, so what's the point? But it is interesting to see the amount of flavored vodkas coming out, the amount of new approaches that the people are having to this 1,000-year-old drink, where they're changing it ever so slightly, but it creates something incredibly different at the end point.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, for sure.
All right. So I think we'll jump onto gin. I'll ask you a few gin questions. Give the derivation of the word gin. So where's gin come from?
Gin. So, again, this just shows how terrible my general spirits knowledge is. I know that there's obviously a tie from Genever, which is coming from Holland, which is more kind of a characterful gin. You've got Old Tom Gin, which was kind of based around the Prohibition era. Again, I know neutral grain spirit with botanicals is your base definition. I'm trying to think when it would have been created. And again, this is something I was literally doing the other day that's gone off the top of my head. I'm going to jump again and say a little bit earlier, and I'm going to say that it started to kick off 11th, 12th century, but I could be completely wrong again.
I didn't actually need the date at all. All I needed was where it came from. But you are correct. It comes from that Hanover, which apparently comes from the Old French, and I will butcher this. Genever. And then that follows on from the Latin juniperus, which means juniper. So we come all the way down to gin being juniper, meaning juniper, which is. I mean, you said earlier that your mother speaks French, so I apologize for butchering that word.
You did it. You did just as well as me describing the history of vodka. So.
All right.
But no, it's interesting again. I suppose with gin in particular. What was it going to say? Again, the definition that juniper has such an integral part of the base spirit. When you look at more, I suppose, modern style interpretations versus more, I suppose, traditional, a lot of people are looking more at this kind of citrus element, adding like citric acid and obviously glycerine and all these additives in certain respects, but moving away a little bit from from juniper, whereas Juniper is very much, you know, keeping in that traditional route. There's an amazing, actually, I don't know if you've ever been a Juniper-based bar in Amsterdam. I'm struggling to think of the name of it, but they do a lot of barrel-aged stuff, everything from like IPA to Irish single malt barrels, and it's like 100 different barrels of different Junipers, which is just delicious.
Well, it's unfortunately I've been to a Geneva-based bar in Amsterdam. I've no idea if it's the same one, but I've just recalled that I believe in Ghent there is one of the world's. I think it's in Ghent. Is one of the one of the world's oldest Geneva bars, and they pride themselves on teaching all different Geneva courses and classes. And I was incredibly annoyed that I actually got on the train to the airport after the Ghent Whisky Festival, forgetting completely that I had meant to stay and visit there.
But
God. I mean,
I'm trying to think of where that is. Obviously, I've been to Ghent a good few times, and I'm trying to think of which that is.
I think it's incredible. Northern Ghent, but you know, it's just one of those places. Some of those things. All right. So we'll test your literature as well here. Okay. Which famous poet when asked where he got his inspiration from, replied, "Gin and drugs, dear lady, gin and drugs."
I don't know why immediately Mark Twain is jumping out to me, just because he seems to have all the famous spirits quotes, but I don't think he was a drug addict, and I don't think he liked gin, so that's not gonna be my guess. Remind me of the quote again. So,
gin and drugs, dear lady, gin and drugs. I'll make it. It was in the 1950s that quote was made.
And it's a writer or a poet.
A poet writer, probably most known. He is most known for his poetry, I want to say. Now I know I'm going to get a lot of flack from my partner here because she loves this author.
So again, my time frame and even my nationality could be completely wrong. I don't know. I said Robert Frost.
I'll be honest with you. I have no idea when Robert Frost was around or when he was. It was actually T.S. Eliot, apparently, at a women's luncheon club in the US in the 1950s. He may have been thinking of Byron's remark, "Gin and water is the source of all my inspiration," another playful allusion to gin's disreputably. Can't say that word. Aye, but a little bit of fun there, a little bit of fun. All right, we'll do 2 whiskey questions here. Now, I asked some of these whiskey questions the other day to someone, and we quickly discovered they were very outdated, so I'll ignore some of them.
Okay.
All right. Here we are. A few American whiskeys are known as sour mash whiskey. What does that signify?
So it's funny. I've heard, and again, it's probably going to mention the antique with the kind of older version, but I've often heard that it's the pot ale that you're reusing in your mash will be sour mash. Now, other people mention that it's actually the equivalent of like your weak worts. So during the mashing process, when you have any of those residue sugars and you're sparging those, you're spraying them down, recycling those is your sour mash. So I've kind of been informed more of the pot ale that's reused is sour mash, but I'm sure there's a different explanation for it in your book.
Well, no, actually, I asked that question on Sunday, and it was Dave from Boutique Whiskey who explained that you are completely correct. It is that residual kind of pot ale on the inside that is added to the subsequent bashes to kickstart fermentation, which is pretty incredible. And and
it's something again that's associated with America, but I think could come over to other countries absolutely, and it's sustainable as well in a certain extent.
I mean, the sustainability of it is fantastic, and it would be very interesting to see someone making a whiskey like that. I doubt the laws would ever change. As far as I understand legislation, you would be violating a couple of parts of legislation to do that. But it could be interesting to see.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, and we've got time for one more question. By the way, anyone who's watching, I should have said this earlier, anyone who's watching, if you've got any questions for Chris, whether they're about Teeling or if you've got some quiz questions for him, feel free to type some in, comment them in, and we'll get them answered for you right here, right now. Because, you know, as soon as he's gone, you're not going to see him for a good while. That's a joke. Chris is always going to be about. All right. So whiskey is made in dozens of countries around the world. Amongst them, Argentina, Iran, Tanzania, and India. Historically, what has whiskey been made of in those countries? What has whiskey been made from?
Repeat again: Argentina, Tasmania,
Tanzania.
Tanzania.
Argentina, Tanzania, Iran, and India.
So in most of those countries, I'd say that you're looking more at the equivalent of like a spice liqueur as opposed to a whiskey. So kind of neutral grain spirit with anything from like botanicals, star anise, juniper, the inclusion of fruits. I'd say it started off very much again like a hodgepodge of different ingredients, and kind of amalgamated more into grains that we see like malted barley and rye and corn. But if I had to guess, again, I'm not too familiar as much on Argentinian whiskey. I only came across actually a Spanish whiskey the other day, a single malt that picked up world's best single malt there this year, which I'm going to try and get my hands on at some stage.
No, you're right. For a long time in a lot of those world countries, it was a hodgepodge of different ingredients. I do know that a few of those in a few of those countries, they were distilling whiskey from molasses at one point in time, which is very interesting because they were essentially making a rum, and it's kind of fine tuning it. Speaking of new world whiskies as well, I know we're going off topic here, but the northernmost distillery in the world, Aurora Spirits in Norway, I think they're 5 meters away from the Arctic Circle, within the Arctic Circle. They're expecting to release their very first batch, their Bifrost whiskey, in the next few weeks. So if you want to pick up something very interesting, I've put aside money for a bottle. I'm going to pick one up as soon as I can because, you know, I've been following them for some time. The Argentinian guys, as you mentioned as well, they've got whiskey soon, and the Spanish fellows, I think that I can't remember what the name of that was, but I've enjoyed a few Spanish whiskeys, and they're quite nice.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of new additions now to the world whiskey category. Like it's even within the last 20 years, it's not as much dominated, you know, I suppose perception wise by just Scotch whiskey, just by Scottish whiskey. You even look at the likes of like the Welsh, or you look at English whiskey, you look at French. A ton of new distilleries now coming up in areas like Brittany and the south of France, and of course in Germany, like you look at the likes of the Stork guys who are bringing, you know, rye whiskey to a new level that I didn't even think would be possible, and obviously done in a very kind of transparent way, which I love. Like one of the first countries to stipulate that you have to have either colorings or artificial colors on the bottle, which I think is amazing. Obviously with ourselves, you know, we're all leaning into natural coloring and non-chill filtered, but they're not as clear cut on the bottles themselves.
I mean, it's disappointing when it's not as clear cut. I do suppose at some point in time you have to ask yourself how much information is too much to put on the bottle. But I do like to see people who are being as transparent as possible with their consumers and with their brand. But when you say that we've got countries around the world, I mean, England's got some 24 distilleries at this point in time. Germany has hundreds. France has nearly 100 or so. But just around the world, you have almost 60 or 62 countries currently producing whiskey, as we would define it as whiskey in either Ireland or Scotland, and it's fantastic to see. It really changes something. It's fantastic when you can see whiskey from the likes of Rwanda or Chile. Fiji's got their own whiskey at this point in time, I believe, as well, and it's absolutely astounding. So it's great to see that islands in the midst of a whiskey renaissance, and all around the world, everyone's joining in and going, yeah, it's a bloody good idea.
These Irish, they know a little bit of what they're talking about.
They know what they're talking about. They know how to make bloody good whiskey as well. So that's something. Anyway, I think we've been going on for 45 minutes now. So I think that's all the time we have. But Chris, it was absolutely wonderful to have you on. Can you tell us where people can see more of you and more of Teeling's?
Absolutely, yeah. If you want to keep an eye on any cocktail-led workshops, we have a weekly virtual workshop which is free and accessible to anybody, called the Teeling Thursdays. Likewise, if you want to keep in touch more from a whiskey front, we're now leading an education program, which is kind of going to be like our whiskey homeschooling, which will be running now every Tuesday. Subject to change. That's not coming in just quite yet. Or if not, if anybody has any personal questions or wants to run a masterclass with myself personally, I am very approachable. You can feel free to send me a message, and I'll be more than happy to get back to you at any stage.
Oh yeah, Chris is a fantastic guy, and his masterclass is absolutely outstanding. So if anyone watching is curious about a masterclass with Teeling, by all means contact Chris, and I'm sure you might not get a better masterclass, and you'll love every single moment of it. But Chris, it's been fantastic to have you on. Everyone has been watching live. Anyone's been watching on the replay, it's been fantastic to have you. Join us next time. Once again, I'm Some Whisky Bloke, and this is Chris Hayes of Teeling Whiskey. Thanks very much, guys.
Cheers, Marcus. Thank you so much.